employers, and it was also just 6 months, and that of course leaves them vulnerable to the risk of remaining trapped with an abusive employer. But that's not all. By disempowering workers through removing their ability to hold their immigration status independently, it became much easier for unscrupulous employers to exploit their employees, knowing that they have little option but to accept the conditions they're in or risk being an illegal immigrant. What's shocking is that right now, workers in this situation can only access help when that abuse meets conditions of modern slavery, which of course, by nature of modern slavery, is near impossible to access help. And this is, of course, a crazy situation, and one which couldn't be more contrary to the government's stated goals on addressing and ending modern slavery. So what have we been doing? Well, over the past several years, we've been campaigning for this change to be reversed to pre-2012 conditions. We've gathered petition signatures, held public protests, and we've seen glimmers of hope. But sadly, they've not been realised, and ultimately we've seen no progress. So we're simply asking that the balance is at least slightly shifted towards the worker, the balance of power, so that this abuse can be prevented from happening in the first place. We want them to be empowered to not only stand up, but also to be able to walk away from an exploitative situation. So today, we're calling on you to help us restore rights for migrant domestic workers. And I'm really fortunate that I'm introducing, and we're hosted today by Marissa Begonia, Executive Director of the Voice of Domestic Workers, Diana Holland, Assistant General Secretary of Unite, the union, and Avril, Policy and Casework Officer at Kalayaan. Unfortunately, Jess Phillips MP is unable to join us today due to a family emergency. However, importantly, we are going to hear from workers themselves who will tell us what all this means in practice. And to introduce them, I'm going to hand over to Marissa, the founding member of the Voice of Domestic Workers, herself a domestic worker, a mother of 3. And she's seeking justice for the UK's 16,000 overseas domestic workers. The Voice of Domestic Workers provides educational and community activities for domestic workers. If you want to tweet during this event, please do use the hashtags restore rights, it's not okay, and the digit 9 years. As I said at the beginning, for those who didn't hear already, we will be doing a question and answer session. So do make a note of your questions. You can put them in the chat box or in the Q&A function at the bottom of the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. Marissa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for hosting our event today, for chairing our event today. It's a very important campaign, and unfortunately, we are now 9 years, and this campaign to reinstate overseas domestic worker visa is led by Unite the Union, the Voice of Domestic Workers, the TUC, Kalayaan, and Anti-Slavery International. Of course, we are happy to have the support of Freedom United. Yeah, Joanna has already mentioned, but I think to give you a bit of shortcut, so what we used to have and what we do not have now. So that was quite long, 1998 to 2012, April 5 was the cutoff. So domestic workers able to change employer, right to renew visa, right to settlement, and or indefinite leave to remain. And after 1 year of this 5 years active employment, they could apply for British citizenship. I came here in 2004, so I am the perfect example on how these rights and protection have truly protected migrant domestic workers. Because when I escaped from abusive employer, I wasn't even aware of all of this, that we have this here in the UK. But when the time that I needed it most, it was there. And the fact that that all these rights, are there, then I was able to rebuild my life and able to do, advocacy campaign and of the voice of domestic workers, and specific with this campaign to restore rights. So if you look at on the right side, so we lost everything in April 6, 2012. That's why we are saying it's now 9 years. So no right to change employer, no right to renew visa, no right to settlement or British citizenship. But although there's a bit of concession in 2016 over during the Modern Slavery Act, so they reinstated the right to change employer, but this is only within 6 months of visa entry. And we launched our campaign last year to reinstate this overseas domestic worker visa. And we also, along with that launch, we also set up the petition of the government to reinstate these rights of domestic workers. However, this is the petition. We want the government to reinstate the pre-2012 overseas domestic worker visa to enable migrant domestic workers to renew visas and have the route to settlement. And this, unfortunately, the response is negative, which was given on March 5. The government not intend to reinstate the overseas domestic category. Yeah. So, and that will remain closed. So the main point that they mentioned, of course, so in the point-based system, domestic workers are categorized as temporary workers. So after 6 months, they should leave and go back to the original country or to the country where they were working before coming here. And the second reason that they mention is the government recognized the potential vulnerability, but the response to this is the nationalized for domestic workers to apply in the national referral mechanism. Ever since, I think in 1998, I wasn't here, but I think Diana could tell more about this because I was already the recipient of that successful campaign way back, yeah, so 1998. And so it's already recognized and always recognized that migrant domestic workers are always the most vulnerable group of workers. And therefore, they need the special protection. So they are categorized as especially protective group of workers. So that's why the overseas domestic worker visa during 1998 to 2012 is always in the special category outside the point-based system. So whatever changes in the point-based system, it shouldn't affect migrant domestic workers as recognized as the most vulnerable group of workers. And I'm the perfect evidence of that. I'm the living evidence of that, because without those rights, I don't know what I am now. To be honest, maybe I'm already undocumented like the domestic workers now. Maybe I already returned helpless and I was able to feed my children. You know, I don't know what will happen to my children. So that's the important protection it has, you know, the overseas domestic worker visa. And that's what we are fighting for, that for quite long now, 9 years, yeah, since the government removed it. So we asked our members to what the views about, you know, how they feel about the changes. So let's listen to the voices, yeah. So I think it is important for us to hear how they feel about these changes.
If the government answer to the abuse and exploitation of domestic workers is to apply in the national referral mechanism, I am saying it is not. I did apply under NRM because this is the only available option, and I passed the conclusive ground. And my 2-year domestic worker visa is going to expire on December 2021. I know this is non-extendable and my dead end. and I haven't started working regularly because of this COVID-19 lockdown. How can this be okay? This is not okay. I am not okay.
My employers were infected by COVID-19. I was forced to care for them because I am undocumented. I was not able to renew my overseas domestic worker visa when it expired after 6 months. I was not given PPE. I used black bean bag as apron, but still I was infected and even forced to work despite being very ill. Every day is very dark with no hope. I wish government could see our sufferings and give our rights back. Is this too much to us?
I'm Jane. I was abused. I work as a nanny and housekeeper, but I was not paid for many months. My employer would often shout at me for every little mistake. I was suffering trauma and severe mental health. I escaped, but I didn't know that I had no rights to renew my overseas domestic working visa. So I became undocumented. During COVID-19 pandemic, my employer terminated me without notice and pay. It was not easy to find a new job. I was jobless for many months, unable to support myself and my family back home. I found one job, but this family is infected by COVID-19. Without my knowledge, it was too late for me to back out. I was forced to work every long hours from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. with no breaks until I get infected with COVID as well. I was very scared, but even I was very sick, this employer let me work non-stop. I begged to let me go, but where shall I go? I am forever trapped with no access to justice, no access to healthcare, and worse, government said it is okay for employer to abuse me. How very sad, helpless, hopeless I am. If government is telling me that employers should abuse me, is this the new legal UK system?
My room has no light, so at times I would sleep in the toilet to keep me safe because the brother of my employer would punch me and sexually assaulted me. I was threatened to die if I report. The government has given me no hope with a response not to give us rights. I was abused because this employer knew they could do anything to me. I'm not okay. I'm suffering from trauma. Until when I would suffer?
I escaped from abusive employer who didn't pay me for over 2 months. I was not able to have a day off as promised and I worked very long hours. I applied in the national referral mechanism only to be refused. Where is the protection here? How could I fight back for my unpaid wages? The government is telling me this is okay. How can I ever be okay? Employers continue to abuse me because they can.
Thank you, Marissa, for sharing those stories. I think it's absolutely evident that a simple change would at least shift the balance of power to one where in those stories we can imagine an opportunity for workers to escape the kind of horrific exploitation that they describe. So let's start to explore a bit more the challenges that we're facing and the opportunities. And I'd like to call on Diana Holland Assistant General Secretary of Unite the Union, representing 250,000 transport workers, 100,000 food workers, and Diana also leads on equalities. She's been awarded an OBE, and her honours were awarded for services to equal opportunities in employment. And today she's going to speak to us on this particular topic. Thank you, Diana.
Thanks very much. And thank everybody who spoke out the way that they did there. It's one of the hardest things, but it's the thing that has driven this campaign since the earliest days. As Marissa said, I was involved first in the campaign in 1990 as a regional officer in the union. And we had success when the overseas domestic worker visa was first introduced in 1998. It was one of the first acts of the new government elected in 1997, but it had cross-party support at the time. And it was because there was such horrific abuse and exploitation, and it was evidenced, and people were speaking out just as they are so terribly still doing today. We don't claim that the overseas domestic worker visa of 1998 got rid of every single bit of abuse, but exactly as Joanna just said, it changed the balance of power and it reduced it. And we know that it's recorded that since this new visa came in, the balance has shifted and exploitation and abuse has become more severe, let alone all the problems of the immigration status and the lack of opportunities and protections that the current visa provides. So I personally am absolutely devastated for everybody involved, but also because I got involved in 1990 to a campaign that was already going in the 1980s. It's something which took a long time to achieve. And I think the fact that it was such a huge alliance of people that did, I was so shocked when that was, every time it came under question, we won it and protected it and people understood it. So it was a real shock that in 2012, particularly following the achievement of the first ILO convention setting global labour standards for domestic workers, which came into force in 2011, really shocking that the UK went in the opposite direction and reduced the protections for overseas domestic workers. And if you look at the evidence around that ILO debate, the UK system is quoted as a positive example in the world at that time. It's no longer the case, and it's being looked at very closely across the world. Just this week, I've attended a global meeting of women trade unionists, and domestic workers are absolutely at the top of the agenda there in terms of what's needed. So what are we doing? I think the most important thing that the overseas domestic worker visa does, even now, is recognise that migrant domestic workers are workers. And I think that the point that you made about International Workers' Day, migrant domestic workers have been at the forefront of the May Day celebrations that we've had for that very reason. And I'm really proud that they're part of the union Unite that I'm the Assistant General Secretary of, but also they have their own independence as a group within the union, because that's really important too. It's got to be migrant domestic workers themselves setting that agenda. The success, as I said, has been everybody coming together, one big alliance. And that's what we are absolutely determined is going to make the difference now, to restore the rights. And there are so many new injustices being described because of COVID in the stories that you've just heard. The situation is worse, and yet the protections are weaker. It is absolutely disgraceful. We asked a parliamentary question. Jess Phillips, who unfortunately couldn't be here, was put down the question to ask the Secretary of State for the Home Office if the government will take steps to tackle serious exploitation and abuse of migrant domestic workers by restoring the visa that was in place between 1998 to 2012, under which migrant domestic workers were workers in their own right and therefore able to renew their visa and change employer without restrictions. The current visa ties them to the employer too much, even though they have the word worker on the visa. They are really tied still. And 6 months is no means you have no possibility to enforce the rights that in theory you have access to. And you only get to extend that period in the most dire of circumstances. It's not possible in the majority of cases of abuse that we see and we experience. The answer from the Minister for Future Borders and Immigration, Kevin Foster, the Undersecretary, is to say that they do not intend to do this. And exactly what has been said already, they claim that the visa provides the opportunity over 6 months, and then they're expected to leave the UK at the end of their stay. And that while they can change employer within the 6 months, the only issue is modern slavery. If they can prove that, then it's possible in very extreme circumstances to go into the national referral mechanism and to get the 2-year extension, which was referred to. That was as a result of all the campaigning that we did to expose how when that didn't exist, it was even worse. But this does not sort the issues in any shape or form. And I think the message that has to go out, Kevin Foster's been in that role for 1 year. We've been campaigning on this for so much longer. We know what works. We know we don't need to relive all that abuse again in order to win support to change it. It's so complacent to suggest that the current system is good enough. It really is not. And what I'm very proud to be able to say is the whole of the trade union movement, millions of workers in this country organised in trade unions and across the world, stand strong with the migrant domestic workers struggle here. And the big message that I always got was you have a card, a union card that had your name on it at a time when nowhere else in this country recognised you as a person or a worker. And also to be able to say you're not alone. Nobody knows what goes on behind closed doors, but with these kinds of meetings, we want to make sure that they do and that they can support this campaign. On the 2nd of June, we are having a roundtable with Holly Lynch, the Shadow Secretary of State. This is another opportunity to expose these issues. We are not going away. We must have justice and we must restore the visa. It's a prevention of problems. Why should we wait until people are at the absolute devastation of modern slavery before there's proper support and protection? It worked. We need it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. That's a powerful call to action, and I couldn't agree with you more about the importance of prevention. It is absolute madness that there's something that could be done so easily that would really get us to a situation of preventing modern slavery rather than trying in some way to find some somewhat ineffective sticking plaster that we're faced with at the moment. So great to hear that there's still momentum, there's still opportunities here, we can still get involved. We're going to hear now from Avril, who will give us some more opportunities for expressing our disappointment, frustration, exasperation with the current situation. Avril Sharp is previously a senior caseworker at the law firm Wilson Solicitors. She's now policy and casework officer at Kalayaan, who provide practical advice and support, and as well as campaign with and for the rights of migrant domestic workers in the UK. And Kalayaan was established in 1987 by domestic workers and their supporters. So Avril, you're in a great position to tell us what we can be doing now. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So as we have said earlier this month, the 6th of April, we mark the 9-year anniversary of the visa rule changes, and we want to do everything in our power to make sure that we don't get to the 10-year anniversary. So today really marks the start of the next phase of this campaign as we look to respond to the government's really disappointing response to our petition. So we had incredible support from lots of people with the first phase, lots of people signing up to the petition. So now that we have the government's response, we want to ask everyone again to stand up for workers and use your voice and make your concerns known to your local MP. We hope that over time, by doing this, we'll have cross-party support across the country that will join the campaign and restore rights for migrant domestic workers. So we've created a template which you can use to contact your MP and ask them to take action. So I'm going to try now to share my screen and take you to it. So if someone can shake their head or give me the thumbs up to say that they can see my screen. Thank you, Joanna. So if you go to Kalayaan's website, you might see some familiar faces on that image. If you go where it says call to action, find out how you can become a supporter of migrant domestic workers, and then click on read more. You'll be taken to a page with some simple steps to follow for you to contact your MP. So the first thing we suggest you do is read our open letter. So this is a letter that was signed by a number of trade unions in the UK and across Europe, and also by civil society leaders as well. This letter is in response to the petition, and again is asking the government to review their decision not to reinstate the terms of the visa. So that was sent earlier this year, 18th of March, and we are awaiting a reply. We will let our supporters know when we get a response to that. If I go back, if you hover over find your MP, if you're unsure who your MP is, you can click on this page. You can put in your postcode. So if I put Kalayaan's postcode as an example, it will take you through to another page, and it will tell you who your MP is, what party they are a member of, and if you scroll down, it will also have details of their contact details, so an email address for them. So again, if I go back, Kalayaan's website, you'll see that there are two templates. I'll explain why that is, but if I just click on the one that says template for supporters, this is, like I say, this is a template, so you don't have to use this. This is just to give you some ideas of the things that we think are helpful to let your MP know. Obviously, you can amend it so you can make it personal to you and put your own reasons why you think this is an issue and why migrant domestic workers should be protected. We have tried in the template, it's only 2 pages long, we have tried to address specific reasons why the government's response is inadequate. Diana very well just explained some of those reasons there. So we've listed quite a few of them in our letter, which we think are important reasons why the government's response doesn't stand up to scrutiny. We also have a paragraph towards the end that addresses the fact that the government has recently confirmed that information sessions or information meetings for newly arrived workers in the UK, which was a commitment made back in 2016, 5 years ago, they have now abandoned even this safeguard for workers. So there are actually no safeguards whatsoever in place for domestic workers. So we wanted to flag that as a really important issue as well. But like I say, these are templates, you can amend these. So there are 2 available on our website. One is for our supporters and one is for migrant domestic workers themselves. For domestic workers and others who are watching this live now or later on catch up, for those who do have an insecure immigration status, please do get in touch with either myself at Kalayaan or Marissa at The Voice so that we can discuss a safe way for you to contact your MP. I say this because unfortunately we can't guarantee what may happen if you did contact your MP and disclose that you have an insecure immigration status. When you write to your MP, you will need to provide your full address, which is why we say that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And then the final thing from me is just to say that if you do hear back from your MP, please do let Kalayaan or the Voice of Domestic Workers know whether they respond and ask further questions, or you have questions about the response that they send to you. We'd really love to hear what they say, whether it is positive or negative, so that hopefully we can start to build a real alliance of MPs standing up for domestic workers. Thanks very much. I'll hand back to Joanna.
Thank you, Avril. Thank you for those really practical steps. Just looking at the chat, I can see that people have found them very useful, and we're certainly going to be expecting to hear some responses. Really good comments. I'm going to just start with Julia's question because it speaks exactly to what you've been talking about, and that is whether there's any way to find out how your MPs acted on this issue in the past, like through votes or through other measures. Is there a website that you can go and find out the position of your MP without asking them?
there is a website called They Work For You. So you can have, you can search for your MP and you can bring up a kind of a recent history of their voting record in Parliament, yes.
Thank you. And Diana, do you have another suggestion?
I was just going to say that it may be helpful if we could think of some key votes to have a look at. Around the Modern Slavery Act, there was obviously quite a lot of the work was done in the House of Lords, so you can find allies as well as people who made an effort and people who've signed up to parliamentary questions over the years. But it would be interesting, and it's just made me think of this, to look at some of the MPs who might have supported the measure in the past, but who are doing a different thing now. I mean, I think the thing that maybe is important to be aware is that this doesn't require new legislation. It's something that can be done through regulations. And while that made it easier to take away, it is something which is easier to put back as well and to make right. So that's something which sometimes there won't be a recorded vote on some of these things. So we tried with the Modern Slavery Act to get it into the Act as a result of that.
Great. Now, Liz Minnie's given us in her comments a real, reality of how it feels to be in this situation currently, where you're really just looking to make a contribution to society, not only for yourself, but here in the UK, and how mad it is that somehow it's so incredibly difficult. So following on from her explanation of her experience, I'd like to go to Wendy's question, very practical question, which is why? And it's a big question. Why is it that the UK government is so resistant to this change? Do we have any insight as to what in particular is holding back the UK government from allowing us to see this visa regime revert back to 2012? Where is that resistance? I'm not sure who's best placed or who wants to speak to that, but maybe you could raise your hand and call on you.
Shall I start with having, as I said right at the beginning, that this was a cross-party change that was supported by everybody because of the abuse that was suffered. And I think if we go to 2009, when the consultation was happening and the establishment of the hostile environment on immigration and all of those issues, I think migrant domestic workers and their situation became completely enmeshed in all of that very negative and quite toxic debate. And the consultation that was done about setting up a new immigration system put overseas domestic worker visa in the forefront, so that it became a representation of all of the things that were wrong with the immigration system in a very bizarre and strange way. Such a small number of people comparatively, it didn't merit any of this. And I think in the previous government, it was the situation of migrant domestic workers was treated very seriously. We had a working group within the border service, which brought together representatives from every government department to examine how the visa was working and any issues that needed to be addressed. It was a serious part of government business. So I think that the only thing I can think is because it was taken so seriously, and it unfortunately became enmeshed in that debate so disproportionately, migrant domestic workers visa was changed, and it affected so few people, but then claims were made that this was all about controlling immigration and reclaiming our borders. That's the one explanation I have.
If you remember, during the Modern Slavery Act review, actually the migrant domestic workers was the most debated issue in the act, and actually they gave up on, let's set aside migrant domestic workers, let's make this an act. And they promised to do whatever the recommendation which they assigned a reviewer, James Ewens, who read the review to that whatever the result of that review, they will do it. But again, I think Avril mentioned in her statement about the information meeting, which included as one of the recommendation, but also the 2 years visa, that was recommended by James Ewens, to allow domestic workers to renew these 2 years visa. It's not something we want, but I think at least it does something that, that will prolong the life, the visa is the life of migrant domestic workers. And I think we are all, the refugees, migrants, we were all used like a scapegoat of this government political games. Irresponsibleness, and I think it is also that was also the time that they started to make all these hostile environment policies, and that include migrant domestic workers. Of course, migrant domestic workers are the most vulnerable group of workers already. Is the worst. That was hit in the changes in 2012. So I couldn't really, because we shouldn't be arguing about the need for more protection for the most vulnerable group of workers. It's common sense, and the fact that I think the trafficking law, the Modern Slavery Act, that they're best in the world, that they're so proud of, the government is so proud of this, that is not a replacement for workers' rights. And I think by workers in our own right, that's non-arguable. And that's why we continue to campaign. We never give up, because we know that this campaign is, and the rights of migrant domestic workers and their life are worth fighting for, and we will never stop.
Absolutely. Avril, would you like to add to that before we get to the next question?
Just a few extra kind of observations. If we're talking current context, someone has reminded me in the chat function that this week the domestic abuse bill became law. And whilst the government flags that as world leading, it's far from it, because it fails to protect all women who are suffering abuse, and notably migrant women. Again, this week there's been a debate in Parliament about victims or survivors of slavery being detained. The government is aware that the changes that they're talking about will highly likely result in more survivors being detained, and are pressing ahead with it anyway. So unfortunately, we are dealing with a government that places a high value on prioritising immigration control to the detriment of numerous vulnerable, marginalised groups of people already living in this country.
Yeah, it's a very good parallel to draw our attention to, and I think also a good point to make when reaching out to your MP, because this is abuse in a domestic setting, and even worse, these are people who are workers. It is horrific. Matt also asks a very specific question about the post-Brexit migration scheme, and the fact that the government mentions that they expect EU citizens to be using the overseas domestic worker visa, and whether we think that's likely to happen. And Avril, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think if we think of the general migration route, which has been in place now for the last 30, 40 years, it has traditionally been workers who are based in the Middle East who then accompany their employer to the UK. The immigration rules haven't changed post-Brexit, so you still have to have worked for an employer outside of the UK for at least 12 months before you accompany them to the UK. So although this visa route has been extended and is now open to citizens in Europe, they will still need to meet the same requirements. So we'll have to wait and see whether there is a need for European private individuals who want to bring their domestic workers to the UK.
Any other contributions specifically on that point? But I think that was a good comprehensive answer, Avril. A lot of
I think just to say really glad that this has been raised, because I think it's another aspect that we need to be really clear we're keeping track of. Yeah.
Absolutely. And another point, just going back to recognising protections for domestic workers and the need, as Marissa said in her intervention, to start with the most vulnerable. I mean, people who are working in the private sphere, in homes where it's very, I mean, where authorities can't easily check what is happening in the workplace, clearly are the place to start with affording protections to avoid exploitation and abuse in the workplace. I mean, obviously. So with that in mind, governments voted overwhelmingly for an international convention for domestic workers at the International Labour Organization. That was in June 2011. So guess what? We're coming up to the 10th anniversary of that convention. Now, despite the fact that convention, which is number 189, so Convention 189, the Convention on Domestic Workers, despite it being voted overwhelmingly by governments, overwhelmingly in favour of the convention, right now we only have 31 ratifications, and a standout country that has not ratified Convention 189 is the UK. Of course, that fits with the experience that we're describing today, but again, it's something that absolutely needs to be addressed. These are minimum international standards. I'd like to also call on the panel and ask whether there's any discussions about the possibility of the UK ratifying Convention 189, and whether there's anything different that's standing in the way of that ratification compared to some of the issues that we've already highlighted in looking at the barriers to getting the overseas domestic visa reinstated as it was pre-2012.
Do you want me to kay Diana first?
I was just going to say, Marissa needs to answer this, because this is a really proud moment in our history, I think, that Marissa Begonia was the representative of the UK workers at the ILO, and she tracked and followed everything. And the governments and employers representatives from every country, but obviously particularly the UK and the EU representatives, she reported back to all of us on everything that was happening. But it's rare that one of the workers directly affected by a convention gets to directly negotiate it. So it's fantastic we can have that insight.
Yeah, that was my my proudest moment. But also, I think we came in the last 2011, yeah, June. That's when we came back to United Nations in Geneva. But that was 2011. If you remember, they put out the proposal to remove these rights on overseas domestic worker visa. I never forget, because it was the day that the night that the convention was voted. It was June 9, yeah, and the proposal was there. And while the government is saying that, oh, we don't need this convention because domestic workers are already protected in the UK. I think they're talking about the pre-2012 rights, yeah, but hypocrisy, yeah, they put out this proposal to remove the rights of domestic workers. And the reason why they didn't even vote, yeah, they abstained, yeah, and the reason why, because they don't want to do any changes in the national law. As you know, domestic workers are excluded in the health and safety law. So they even use the elderly as an excuse that it's going to be a burden to elderly, that also it is the privacy of employer, yeah, so it will affect the privacy of employers to inspect private household, but they Unite the Union Health and Safety. We work on research, to try to lobby the health and safety, to why it is important to include domestic workers in the health and safety legislation. But they were closed. They didn't even bother to meet with us. They just say in the email that this is something they don't want to discuss. They are not open to do any changes. So that's the main reason why they refuse to vote, and of course until now they haven't ratified the convention. But also, if you look at the following, they removed what they proposed. They removed all these rights in 2012. So that doesn't mean we are not continuing to lobby. We've been campaigning, we've been lobbying about this ratification, and actually by June we will have many events to highlight the 10 years anniversary of this campaign, and we will update you, of course, for the following events, because I think the importance of that convention, it does recognize domestic workers as workers, while what the current system that we have, it recognizes domestic workers as victims. So I think they're totally different. There should be different. There are victims, but there are majority of domestic workers workers. We're not saying against the trafficking legislation, but we are saying domestic workers, and that's what they say. Decent work should begin at home.
That's that's very true, and that's something that I think the government should remember for sure. Thank you, and well done, Marissa, for the work you've done on making. I think actually that convention might have been one of the fastest to get to conclusion and to be adopted by the International Labour Organization. So well done on that. We'll keep fighting to get those ratifications increased. And if you want to take action and express your support for it, you can do that on freedomunited.org. We have a campaign click on ACT. I'll put the link in the chat as well, where you can express your support to your Labour Ministry. Also, there's another question in the chat that I'm going to answer, which is a very good question. Another one which just feels crazy to even be asking, which is, why do they keep putting modern slavery victims in detention? Well, it's a brilliant question. And of course, there is we've heard already that there's a prioritization of immigration over protecting people's rights. It is crazy. Again, we have a petition on Freedom United to try and change this. We're working together with an organization called After Exploitation. You can sign that petition and call for victims around the world to not be detained. It's incredibly important. And there's also some opportunities to, you can also find the link actually through the Voice of Domestic Workers website, which Marissa's helpfully just sharing her screen and showing you right now. So I also saw a really interesting intervention by Celia in the chat, and she's explaining that the UK government has always been against investigating private homes. So what I was talking about, a challenge of ensuring that working conditions in the private home is up to minimum standards. There are countries, Celia explains, that have found imaginative ways of dealing with this, and she mentions Uruguay. And I think it'd be quite interesting for us to hear, if any of the panelists could share, an example of how actually these challenges aren't barriers, they're just opportunities for invention and to come up with ways to ensure that workers, wherever their workplace is, are not isolated and are not put in positions where their vulnerability can be exploited. Does anyone have an example they can share from another country that we could be calling for in the UK?
I don't think I'm going to be able to answer your question exactly as you've put it, but certainly the point I've always made is there are people who work in many jobs in the public sector that involve going into people, and the private sector that involve going into people's homes. And it's not good enough, I don't think, for the employer, where they work the rest of the time elsewhere, to just say, we're not interested in the fact that when you go to either care for somebody in their home or to install equipment in their home or anything else, or deliver things to their home, that we have no interest in your terms and conditions and the protection of you during that period of time. And I think that why over migrant domestic workers and why domestic workers should be treated differently than the health and safety protections that apply generally if you're employed, and to what degree does it become acceptable to say that's the total responsibility of the householder and the person has no responsibility. I don't know all the details, but I think there may be something better in Ireland that they have as a system, which I was actually going to follow up on. So I'm afraid I can't give the answer, but I know that they've been doing some really good work there to try and address this. And because it's Ireland and therefore it's an example that is harder to say, but it's so different or something like that. I wanted to get that example, but there are others across the world. And I think we should perhaps put those together and say it is possible. And certainly the ILO examples are extremely strong on this. The way that the convention is worded also does not require the kind of changes that is being suggested. Sometimes I wish it would, but there's plenty of opportunities for national governments to say we're ratifying it, but there are national conditions that will prevail in certain parts, and that is written into the convention. So it is not absolutely not the case that the UK couldn't ratify it.
UK actually refused to accept our argument that private homes are actually the workplace of migrant domestic workers. So it's not just about the issue of privacy of employers, but also it is the workplace of migrant domestic workers. And I think the excuse that they are also using is the shortage of people inspecting, yeah. But I think wherever company, they won't go there to inspect regularly, unless there are accidents. I think it's the same with private homes. If there is some problem, serious problem, of course that's the time they will go and check. We're not saying check regularly and harass the employers. What we are saying is the need and the importance of migrant domestic workers to be protected under health and safety, yeah. And that, as I said, the government is not open. I know that Ireland has good one. I think we need to look at back to look at the Ireland, but of course the law is applicable to them. But also I think one way, and thank you for giving us that view, that we can use other example, to lobby the government, yeah, that's successful.
Yeah, and even just looking closer to home, Rosie has helpfully pointed out that the UK recognises private homes and workplaces from a health and safety point of view, which Diana also touched on, and builders are protected when they work in your home. So it is a very sort of academic point. Despite the challenges, the responsibility is still clear. And Celia's point is just ridiculous. It's just shocking to think that an adoption of a dog would require an inspection, and apparently despite having that, it's impossible to check what conditions a worker would have in a workplace. Clearly there's not a strong basis for the position that the government is maintaining at the moment. There's a lot of arguments that we have that we can use to show that the only sensible course of action is to seek change. I noticed as well in the questions there was a request for the links. Avril has kindly shared the links to the letters, the template letters. So please do click on the QA button and check answered. You'll see the links are all listed there. You can have a chance to copy and paste it just as we come to the end of this event. And please do take this opportunity to go onto Kalayaan's website, get those templates, reach out to your MP. It's so important. We are just reaching the end of today's event. So I would just like to briefly pass to Marissa as our host today to ask her to say closing words as we reach the end. I think what's been a very powerful and I hope motivating opportunity for us to really see and secure what we want to see. We don't want to be going even another year with this situation. Thank you, Marissa.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you so much. I think that will also help us refer to the question by Alfonso Del Preo. Yeah, is we need more support, of course, from different groups, from individuals, from employers. We would like employers to be talking as well how important we are to them, you know. And because if this is how the carer of our children, the carer of our elderly, the carer of our disabled are being treated, you know, how we are in the society, in the outside world. Yeah, and the need for us to unite, to support our campaign. We are happy, we are glad that we have the big support from United Union, from the TUC, of course, Kalayaan by staff, and we as Freedom United. And I know Freedom United has been very supportive ever since they have done petition as well. But we want you to you know, to support us. Go to Kalayaan website, go to the Voice of Domestic Workers, pledge your support. Everything is there as well. Write to your MPs, and of course you will hear from in June about the Holy Lynch will host a parliamentary a roundtable discussion among labor MPs. So watch out for that, but also for our ILO convention campaign. So thank you so much. As we always say this, that domestic work is work. Domestic workers are workers, and that has always been. And we want to say thank you also to all our fellow domestic workers who are here today, who never tired to, you know, to reach out, you know, to give the voice, you know. I think it's important that they are in the front line of the campaign, same way with the way United Union has always put me forward in the international campaign on ILO Convention 189. So thank you so much to all everybody. Joanna, thank you for hosting this event. Also on the back, we have Amy Laurel, Miss Amy Laurel, for guiding us this event. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, if everyone has something to say.
Well, just a big thank you to you for persevering and fighting on for justice. Thank you very much to Diana for your incredibly important work and your time today, and Avril as well. Thank you very much for attending. I hope you found it useful, and I hope we can count on your support.
Thank you all.
Thank you.